Well, we're looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. Anybody got any? Have you come to it with any thoughts, any notions, having studied it before, anything like that?
I've got a kind of a title that I put on myself, which is "No Real Meaning to Life Apart from God."
Yeah, that's a good one. No real meaning of life apart from God. And the summary that Ken Easley, who wrote a book that it's been very helpful in this study, which is an overview of all the books. His summary of it is: although human beings can accumulate many things, accomplish much, and achieve great wisdom, these are without profit and ultimately pointless unless one has lived in fear and obedience to God. So you said it more concisely.
More simple.
Yeah. Read yours again.
No real, underlined twice, meaning to life apart from God, underlined once.
Right. No real meaning to life apart from God. That's a good summary. This book is I've thought of it as the philosophy book, if you use that term in its best meaning, I think, technically, in the Bible. It points us to what life is about. As a matter of fact, just so you see what we're talking about today, turn to chapter 6. And somebody read verse 12 for us. Ecclesiastes chapter 6 and verse 12.
For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun?
Okay, there's the ultimate question in life, right? It's not only Christians or worshipers of the Lord Jesus. It wasn't only Israel in their day that asked this question. This is a pretty universal question, right? I mean, this is the question, why? Which made me think of the story that I don't know if it actually happened. It may have happened after the story, I don't know, but some philosophy exam in college where the question was, why? It was like, number one, why? And somebody answered, why not? But things are not that frivolous. Nobody lives life like that. Everybody cares about something, if it's nothing more than self. And so everybody has a stake in this question, right? Who knows what is good for man in this life? What is good for man in this life? That's, what is life about? And that's what we're talking about. Another phrasing of that question is in the very beginning, chapter 1 and verse 3. What profit has a man from all his labor, which he toils under the sun? That's a little more specific. When you break it down, he's asking the question, what's the point? Well, let me give you a few details about this book. This was written by Solomon, and I think the best evidence points to the fact that it was written near the end of his life, which means that even after all of his straying and marrying and taking on women of foreign countries and foreign gods, that his conclusion was that he should worship the true and living God. I think the best fit to all the information we get in the life of Solomon and this book, especially with this book, is that in the end he saw that it was right to fear and obey God and to serve Him and to have his heart for Him. Because he kind of covers all the topics. As king, he could do whatever he wanted to do. He could pursue whatever he wanted. And the path toward ambition, that road without fear of God, led him to say vanity. The path of pleasure without God, vanity. The path of leisure, or just kind of skipping through life, I'm not even going to worry about it. That caused him to conclude it's vanity. And he came to a serious conclusion that was very correct at the end. We'll read that when we get there. So Solomon wrote it about 931 BC, which would be close to the time of his death. If you want to think about this, he reigned about 40 years. His father David about 40 years before him, and that they cover almost a century together. And then you put Saul in there, and it's over a century, the United Kingdom. But David and Solomon. And then we know that things didn't go well after the death of Solomon, and a lot of it was because of his behavior and what he had chosen to do. So that's who it is and when it was. The setting, Israelites, Jerusalem, all who will hear. He's talking to the people in Israel, but he's not necessarily saying this is a message only for you. He's talking generally about these very fundamental questions. And the purpose is to answer the question, what's the meaning of life? The themes, the meaning of life, vanity, that happens a lot, the word vanity. And the word vanity can have a few nuances. It can mean emptiness or pointless, but it can also refer to incomprehensible or, it's beyond me. I think for the most part, emptiness is a good way to think of it. It's empty of meaning in and of itself. If the thing is vain, think of it being in vain. And then the conclusion of the whole matter. This is a book that a couple of times poses serious questions that let you know what its subject matter is. In the last section, start with these words, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. So we don't, unlike the philosophy classes that I took, we don't just pose the question and then debunk all the answers. That's what I remember about philosophy class in college. The question is why, and then we'd go through a list of philosophers from the ancient world all the way up to present day and put their ideas up. And the professor would also be able to point out the weaknesses and why the answers were not accurate for all of them, but he never got around to, but here's the true answer. And what was sad is this was a school that at the time was affiliated with the Tennessee Baptist Convention, and there should have been an answer given. We didn't study Solomon and his conclusion. If this is philosophy, it's biblical, obviously, and divine in its origin. It's God answering the question of why.
I think it was so interesting to me, it struck me probably the last time I went through, or maybe the time before that he didn't stumble into all these things. That he was purposely
That's right.
Searching for all the craziness out there to see if it would bring any meaning. He had his mind set on doing all these things.
Yeah. That's an interesting observation. He was not trying to survive and groping for answers. He was the king and tells you, I could have whatever I was in a position to pursue this. And he wanted to answer the question. And so he could, if he decided, I'm for the next period of time, all you people, you do what you need to do. I'm not going to work hard. I'm just going to relax and take it easy and see it. Maybe that's the meaning to life. But that was not satisfactory. He also had a period where he said he just got at it hard. Ambition, toil, let's build some stuff. Let's do some stuff. And that didn't get him where he needed to go. It makes me think of a USA Today article many years ago. A rock and roll artist, John Cougar Mellencamp, had achieved a succession of number one hits and had gained all the wealth and the fame and all the stuff that goes with that. And he wrote, there's this article in which, it was sad because he said, I thought on the way up, when I get there, then I'll be satisfied. That'll be fulfilling. That'll be all I need. And he said, it's not. It's the sad thing is all I can tell you is, try to have a party and enjoy yourself because life is short and then it's over. I don't think he got invited to very many graduations to give the speech at graduation after that conclusion. But he was just saying what Solomon said. It's just that he didn't have an answer. He didn't end his article with, here's the conclusion of the whole matter, like Solomon. Let's look at a few key verses then. Let me give you the outline. It's very simple. It's a very simple outline, but it's really, you know what the book is about after we've already talked about it. But the introduction in chapter 1, verses 1 to 11. And then you get Solomon's observations on life as point number 2. That's chapter 1, verse 12 to chapter 12, verse 8. And then you get Solomon's conclusion, chapter 12, verses 9 to 14. So we'll look at some of his observations on life. Well, even the introduction. Verse 2. Somebody read verse 2 and see if you can tell me the key word from verse 2. Not all at once, but somebody.
Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all of vanity.
Okay, could you come up with a key word there? Vanity. In case anybody was still wondering. That's how the book starts. I think that's a disappointing beginning to the message, because verse 1 is just, here from Solomon. He says it this way, it's a lot of dignity. I think you would expect the next verse, his first words to be good and weighty and helpful, because it's the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? He's both introducing his question, and he's also letting us know that there's not a very helpful answer except for one, the conclusion. And I think that's important, because what do sinners do? We are made, I know John Calvin used the Latin phrase, sensus divinitatis, which means every human is created with a sense of the divine. All people know that there's a God. That's been borne out indisputably in every culture. There's religion. People are looking for that. Do they all come to the same conclusion, or is there a variety of religion in the world? Variety. So the fact that Solomon goes down several roads is important to show that there's no answer there's no answer in this one, there's no answer in this one. And then he comes to one conclusion. And that's really what Christianity is. That's the great and wonderful position that we have in relation to the world. We get to say, we have the answer. We have the answer. Hope is in the other class, but this morning she turned on a program that had testimonies of former Mormons. And, these were not people who were just on the periphery in Mormon stuff. They were leaders and really involved, and they were doing their best. They were trying to get the best out of it they could and put their best into it. And, they could have said the same thing Solomon did. Vanity. In both the emptiness of it, but you know how the word vain has taken on the self-centeredness, that meaning. And that's because if something is vain, it's it's seeking significance for its own sake. And that's how that self-centeredness is part of the word now, at least in English. And so I heard some testimonies today of people basically saying what Solomon said, and saying, I was there. I put myself into it. It's not like I was just casual about it or just, had a whatever attitude. They do it, and then they conclude that this is not it. Yes, sir?
No, I'm just, every time I read through it, I've also subtitled it The Book of Regrets, and I just see my life all through this. And I praise God for chapter 12.
Amen. Amen. There are a few testimonies out there. There are a few testimonies out there of people who were involved in Christian stuff, Christian religion, and they left. They said, it's not real, did something else. But I haven't ever heard a testimony of anybody who said, I was overwhelmed with the truth of God's grace, with the reality of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and found it not enough. I've never heard that. I've heard complaints about going to church and the people who were there. And of course, I'm here. I'm not surprised by that. We know us, and so if people would say that. But our message is, this is not us, that we're fellow pilgrims. We're those who God is gathering, but we're not the organization of it, the human makeup of it. That's not Christianity. That's not the fundamental, what is necessary. What's necessary is first God. And today in the sermon, praise God, we'll be looking at His character a little bit and what you can in one sermon out of Zephaniah. That's the difference. That's the difference. David's definition, or summary, and Easley's summary say that stuff is a part of life, whatever system you're in, ambition or work. Hindus are working today in India. They're thinking, they're loving their families, they're having disputes, they're struggling, they're doing life the same way Solomon did, except they're not kings, same way we do. All this stuff is happening. But the difference is they don't know God who made them. So they're frustrated. Everybody who doesn't know and worship God, they're their own worst enemy to knowing Him. That's the sad reality of sin. But without that relationship with God, life is just a groping. Look at where modern day philosophers have concluded. If you've ever done any reading much about, go back a couple hundred years and pick up and look at just summaries of what philosophers have concluded, it's really bad. They're so negative that they've concluded, some of them have tried to argue that we really can't even communicate. We're not even communicating. It's an illusion. And I think that's going too far. That's been demonstrated to be false. One of my favorite stories about how that is just not true is one of these guys who had swallowed that deconstructionism stuff about language, that we're only under the illusion that we're even communicating, and that's the problem with relationships. It's language and all that. And he was explaining his position to Francis Schaeffer in the L'Abri Fellowship over in Europe, where Francis Schaeffer had his place. And Schaeffer listened patiently for a while as he lined out the philosophy and what was all wrong. And just abruptly and loudly, Schaeffer interrupted him and said, "Get me some tea!" And the guy was startled and stopped. He stopped his diatribe about how we are not able to communicate, stopped and went and got some tea and brought it to him, and he drank it and said, "I think we're communicating." That's what I had in my mind. I said the word for it, and you brought it.
There was I was sitting next to a guy on a plane who was reading a book, and I said, "Hey, what's the book about?" He says, "Man's inability to communicate." And I said, "So you are reading one man's effort to communicate to you in writing that man is unable to communicate."
Right, that's right.
And he slammed the book shut, went to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not the problem. I would say humans have been very creative and brilliant in making themselves understood and communicating exactly what they want to say. It's really amazing just going to the classical conversations training a couple of weeks ago and thinking about education and what humans are doing in literature and all that. It's amazing. Solomon doesn't deny that. He talks about lots of stuff that can be done and that he did, accomplishments. But the problem is that in and of itself is vain. It doesn't lead where you need to go. It doesn't feel that sense of the divine. Now we know that people aren't walking around going, "I have a sense of the divine and I can't feel it. What can I do?" They don't do that. But they do have it and they do seek to feel it and they grope around. And Francis Schaeffer's book, The God Who Is There, if you want to just get into this topic a little bit and find a modern thinker from a biblical worldview, just kind of laying it out and showing this is all, it's all vanity. He's kind of expanding on what Solomon said and applying it to especially Western civilization and looking at the art, the music and culture and what's going on. And his conclusion is, and he says you can see it happening, you either have God and you relate to Him on His terms, or you have nihilism, nothingness. And it's just going to be depressing. The art's going to be depressing. The music's going to be, it's just going to be people singing about how terrible things are. And he's right. He's right. So, I believe this is the explanation for how humans end up, how we end up with something like Nazi Germany. They have a sense of the divine. They're groping for something. Somebody comes along and seems to give them meaning, and so they go after it. But it just leads. It's evil. Everything is evil that is not of God. So that's what Solomon is saying. Let's look at a few here. There's some really helpful passages here. Let's go to this one. Let's look at chapter 3 and verse 14. Here's some truth in the middle of his. Let's back up even more. Here's one of the verses that Calvin, and this idea of the sense of the divine. Look at verse 11. Somebody read verse 11.
He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end.
Okay, here's why people who are not born again are not ultimately satisfied, fulfilled, happy people. They have eternity in their hearts, but they don't know what to do about it. They understand there is something transcendent to them. That reality does not end with their existence. You can think of it in every way. Chronologically, there were people before us, and there will be people after us, depending on God's timing. But that knowledge, and also think of it spatially. There have been people, dreamers, stand on the earth and look into outer space. We've made a little progress. You think about the whole universe. We've started on the earth and we've made it to the moon. But we have a sense that this is not, we're not on the edge here. This is not the wall. There's more in every way. It's interesting to read stories from the mission field when missionaries have encountered cultures for the first time with the gospel, to find out their stories and their culture, and because it just always shows that they have eternity in their hearts. They know there's somebody they need to know, and they don't know who it is. One of my missions professors told a story of, it was funny, it was partially a little bit of a confession. They used medical missions. He was in Africa on Lake Malawi, and he was getting to go to some places that the mission board said nobody has been there since David Livingstone. So this is decades, 100 years or so. And he got up to the shore, and he brought some medical supplies to help. And these tribes that nobody even knew where they were had come down, and people were hearing the gospel. And he was thinking, now we're doing something here. We've got some missions going on. I'm the first guy since Livingston in this area, and this is awesome. Two things that the chief said. The first thing, because he said, Dr. Vickers said he met one of the chiefs, a very important chief, and everybody deferred to him, and he was, so he knew he needed to explain the gospel very well to him. So he was meeting with him, and he was laboring on sin, how bad we are. And he said after a little while, the chief stopped him and said, look, we know that. We know that we are wicked. We're bad. We see it all the time. We have to have laws to keep from destroying ourselves. We don't know what to do about it. Do you have anything to tell us in light of this? So he was amazed by that. The other thing that he told that was amazing was that he made some reference to being the first person to talk to them about this message, because they talked and they remembered David Livingstone. He met one old man who was a little boy and had actually seen David Livingstone. He's a famous missionary. You can Google him. Maybe romanticized a little bit in the years that have gone by. But anyway, he said, well, I'm the first one. And the chief said, well, no. We came to hear you because of the man that came before you. He said, we don't have a record of any man coming before me. He said, well, we're here because of him. One man spent 30 years out in this region where no mission board thought any missionary was, and preached the gospel, and they made life hard on him. He lived in a little hut outside of the village, according to what the chief said. They kind of treated him like an outcast, and he stayed and preached anyway. And they couldn't bring themselves to completely run him off because they just were intrigued with, what is this guy? Who is this guy? But he stayed and he stayed and he stayed. He had one convert, and the day after he baptized him, the rest of the villagers attacked him and killed him. But he was there for 30 years, according to what the villagers told Dr. Vickers. But when he was dying, he called the chiefs, and because he'd been there for so long, the head chief and then the others from the other villages decided, let's go hear what this man has to say. And he said, you and your people have not heard my message, but the same God that sent me to you is going to send another. And when he comes, hear him. And that made a big impact on them. And so that's why he came. So that's a long way, I guess, off from this. But what I'm saying is, those people didn't do what they did because they read Ecclesiastes or anything else. This is a description of life. It happened in that setting. They pursued things and admitted, what are we doing? This isn't leading anywhere. what is the point of all this? And so there was a great coming to Christ in that region because of all that. They had eternity in their hearts. That doesn't negate the effect of sin, does it? What would sin do to the fact that God has put eternity in our hearts and we know that there's something bigger than us?
Find God.
Sin will cause us to look to ourselves for the answer, or anything other than God. So we have to, just because He has put eternity in our hearts, and because men know this is pointless. Life is pointless. You know, the John Cougar Mellencamp article didn't end with him saying, "So I've given my life to Jesus." Okay, now look in verse 14. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it, that men should fear before Him. There's a lot said here about whatever God does. It's forever, can't be added to, can't be taken from, and God has a motive. What is the motive in God taking action? That men should fear before Him. And if someone said, well, that's very egotistical. It's like I heard a guy say one time, it's not egotistical to act like you're the center of the universe, if in fact you are the center of the universe, and you're just acting according to reality. The other thing is this is the only possible salvation of mankind, right? That we fear Him. I guess we better go to that now. There's more. I spent too much time on the Africa story, but one more on the way, two more on the way. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 20. There's not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Are y'all noticing that we've got pretty much a gospel theme here? God does things to bring men to Him. All men are unjust. There's not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. That verse alone brings down almost all the other religious systems in the world. There are a few people who just give in to it. There are a few systems who just say, no, let's just sin. But most religions are going to say, or we're going to be good and earn our way. So if you got a problem here. There's not a just man on the earth who does good and does not sin. Verse 29 is a little description of that. Truly this only I have found, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So that means it's our own fault that there's not a just man on the earth. God made Adam and Eve in innocence, created them in righteous innocence. All right, we better go to the end so we don't run. We got to get the conclusion of this, or we'll all be nihilists as we don't want to be depressed as we leave. Let's read verses 9 to 14.
From which chapter?
From chapter 12. This is the conclusion. Anybody want to read that for us?
Sure. Not only was the teacher wise, but also he imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by the one shepherd. Be warned, my son, anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Okay, now, put this together with when Jesus was asked,
what are the works of God that we can do them? You remember what he said? What did he say?
Love him when he has sent.
That's right. Yep, to trust, believe, love the one that he has sent. That is how we obey ultimately. Now, we need to remember that God is moving his people to a point where we will, in glorified bodies, keep his commandments perfectly. Our worship of him, our social relationships with one another will be blameless, sinless in that wonderful setting in glory. So when he says keep his commandments, that's true and required. It's just that God is accomplishing that for his people. All the other schemes they put this under the duty of the person, and as if God is waiting and all he does is look to see, did you keep all the commandments? But God didn't just step back and look to see. He became flesh and kept the commandments on our behalf. But it's not just so that we can make it in. The making it in, the process from here to there, he's sanctifying us, working so that our fear of him is more pleasing to him moment by moment. Our obedience to him is increasing because we learn more about him and his law and who he is. And we give ourselves to that as our whole duty, as our all. And as we do that, as redeemed people, one day we know that he's going to finish the work, and we will be in perfect, acceptable to him fear, and perfect, acceptable to him obedience. We never will be there on our own apart from Christ, but the finished product will be blameless service and worship to the Lord. And so, at that point, will we have a craving because of eternity in our hearts? The only thing is that I think it'll be there, but it's not only a craving; it's provided because we're in the presence of the eternal one. So it's like I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we would say, "That's all. I don't want to know any more about God or who He is." We will always we will always find Him infinitely compelling, beyond what we know. We want to know Him more, and yet the satisfaction of His very presence and immediate presence will be there. So all of this is going to be fulfilled. There won't be people sitting around doing philosophy concluding nihilism in glory. There won't be depressing music and poetry and art that, has a bad, kind of down. It'll all be good and right there. Fear God and keep His commandments, and that's through Christ. Anybody got a comment or question? This is the conclusion of the whole matter. If you ever start to wonder, what is this life about? 12 chapters right here, or if you want to just read the last couple of verses, just get the quick. Fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. Judgment is coming, and with that we'll conclude and get ready to go think about Zephaniah. Lord, thank You for the truth of Your word. You're the solution to all of our problems. And without You, there is no solution to any problem, ultimately. Everything that people think that is what they want to do is just temporary. And everything You do is forever and can't be added to or taken away from. You are God. We are not. Thank You that You choose to redeem a people for Yourself. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Mike.